At 3:47 in the morning on June 14th, a signal vanished. Not a distress call, not a warning, just silence, where a signal had been 1 second and nothing the next. The vessel was the MT Seagulf Voyager, a VLCC supertanker carrying 2.1 million barrels of crude oil, valued at approximately $189 million at that morning's market price. Its automatic identification system transponder, the same technology that lets maritime authorities track every commercial vessel on Earth, went dark at coordinates 26 degrees north, 56 degrees east, 12 nautical miles from the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. Within 4 minutes, the United States Fifth Fleet Command Center in Manama, Bahrain, received the alert. Within 11 minutes, Iranian state media published a statement. That gap, 4 minutes to alert, 11 minutes to publication, tells you something that no official briefing will say directly. Someone was ready to announce this before the smoke had cleared. This is not a story about one tanker. This is a story about a decision that was calculated months in advance. And evidence strongly suggests that Washington had specific intelligence that something was coming. The question is what they did with it. Let me start by establishing what we actually know, not what Iranian state media claims, not what anonymous officials suggested to Reuters, but what verifiable data and named institutional sources tell us. Because the data alone is extraordinary. The MT Seagulf Voyager was not traveling alone. It was part of a loose commercial convoy moving through the northern Persian Gulf, a standard routing pattern used by tankers to reduce individual exposure in high-risk corridors. According to vessel tracking data published by Marine Traffic, 3 other supertankers were within 18 nautical miles of the Seagulf Voyager at the moment its transponder went offline. None of them were struck. That selectivity matters enormously. Analysis published by the United States Naval Institute within hours of the incident noted that the damage pattern, specifically the location of the impact point at the vessel's midship section, just above the waterline, is consistent with the terminal ballistic signature of the Noor anti-ship missile. The Noor is Iran's domestically produced variant of the Chinese C-802, with a confirmed operational range of 170 kilometers and an active radar seeker in its terminal phase. It does not miss its designated target by accident. It strikes where it is aimed. This was not a warning shot. This was a precision strike against a specific vessel at a specific moment in a specific location. Now, here is the historical context that reframes everything you are about to hear. The last time Iran conducted systematic tanker attacks in the Persian Gulf was between 1987 and 1988, during what naval historians document as the Tanker War, a sustained IRGC naval campaign that targeted over 250 commercial vessels and ultimately forced the United States Navy to launch Operation Earnest Will, the largest naval convoy operation since World War II. That campaign cost the global shipping industry an estimated $4.5 billion in damages and insurance losses before a ceasefire took hold. What stopped it was not diplomacy. It was the accidental shooting down of Iran Air Flight 655 by the USS Vincennes in July 1988, an incident that shifted the political calculus inside Tehran overnight. We are not in 1988. The constraints that existed then do not all exist now. Here is what the IRGC's own strategic communications reveal. In a statement carried by Iranian state broadcaster IRIB on June 14th, naval commanders described the strike as a measured calibration, their phrase, not a translation artifact. That specific vocabulary is not accidental. According to a March 2023 analysis by the RAND Corporation examining IRGC communications doctrine, the phrase measured calibration appears in Iranian military statements specifically when commanders want to signal to Washington that escalation thresholds have been deliberately respected. In other words, Iran is not trying to start a war. Iran is trying to demonstrate that it can conduct these operations without starting one. That distinction is precisely what makes this moment more dangerous, not less. Because according to the vessel registration data held by Lloyd's List Intelligence, the MT Seagulf Voyager, despite flying the flag of the Marshall Islands, was operated by a Houston-based energy logistics subsidiary with direct contractual ties to 3 refineries on the United States Gulf Coast. Iran did not strike a random tanker. Iran struck an American commercial interest and then immediately told the world it had done so, at a speed that suggests the announcement was prepared before the missile was fired. The question that brings us to the next layer of this story is the one that official briefings are carefully avoiding. What happened in the 72 hours before that transponder went dark? 72 hours before the MT Seagulf Voyager went dark, a sequence of institutional decisions unfolded in Washington that, when laid side by side, form a pattern that no serious analyst can dismiss as coincidence. I want to walk you through this sequence precisely because the timing is the story. June 11th, 9:42 in the morning Eastern Time. The United States Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, published a formal designation notice targeting 14 entities operating within Iran's petroleum export network. The designations included 3 shipping companies, 2 port facility operators, and 9 financial intermediaries spread across the UAE, Iraq, and Hong Kong. This was not a minor administrative action. According to the OFAC press release dated June 11th, the designated entities were collectively responsible for facilitating the movement of approximately $300 million in Iranian oil revenues per quarter. That is the kind of financial disruption that gets attention inside the IRGC's Economic Warfare Division within hours, not days. June 12th, the following morning, Iran's permanent representative to the International Atomic Energy Agency formally suspended participation in the IAEA's quarterly inspection protocol, a protocol established under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action framework. The IAEA Director General's office confirmed this suspension in a statement published on June 12th. This was the 3rd suspension of inspection cooperation in 14 months. Each previous suspension was followed within 30 days by a demonstrable Iranian military action in the maritime domain. That pattern is documented in a November 2024 report by the Congressional Research Service, specifically in the section titled Iran's Escalatory Response Patterns to Sanctions and Inspection Pressure. June 13th, approximately 6 in the evening Gulf Standard Time, vessel tracking data from marine traffic confirmed that the USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer assigned to the United States Fifth Fleet, repositioned to a station approximately 80 nautical miles west-southwest of Bandar Abbas, Iran's primary naval base on the Strait of Hormuz. This repositioning placed the Gravely within its standard defensive intercept range for vessels transiting the northern Gulf. Iran's coastal surveillance network, which according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies maintains radar coverage of the entire Gulf surface, would have detected this repositioning within minutes. Now hold all 3 of those data points simultaneously. A major financial strike against Iran's oil revenue infrastructure on June 11th, a formal Iranian institutional withdrawal signal on June 12th, an American naval repositioning on June 13th. And at 3:47 on June 14th, the Noor missile hit. According to analysis published by the RAND Corporation in 2023 examining IRGC decision-making timelines, the organization requires a minimum of 48 to 72 hours to move from a political authorization decision to an executed maritime strike operation. The technical preparation, target confirmation, launch positioning, and command authentication process cannot be compressed below that window under normal operational conditions, which means the authorization for this strike was almost certainly issued on June 11th or June 12th, the same 48-hour window in which Washington delivered its financial blow and Tehran delivered its institutional signal. This is not escalation that emerged from a single provocation. This is what the RAND Corporation's 2023 report specifically terms conditioned reciprocal threshold behavior, a strategic pattern in which both parties have pre-established response packages that activate automatically when specific trigger conditions are met. Washington pulled a trigger on June 11th. Tehran's response package activated on schedule. The 72-hour window was not a warning period. It was a countdown that both sides understood, and neither side moved to stop. The question that now demands an answer is the one that brings us to the geography at the center of everything. Because understanding why this particular strike in this particular location carries consequences far beyond one damaged tanker requires understanding the single most consequential geographic choke point on the surface of the Earth. There is a stretch of water on this planet so narrow, so consequential, and so irreplaceable that military strategists at the Pentagon have spent decades designing contingency plans around one central nightmare scenario, the scenario in which it closes. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest navigable point. The actual shipping lanes within that strait, the lanes that supertankers physically use, measure 3.2 kilometers in each direction, separated by a 2-kilometer buffer zone. That is the corridor through which the global economy breathes. According to the United States Energy Information Administration's most recent quarterly assessment, published in February 2025, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products transited the Strait of Hormuz every single day during the fourth quarter of 2024. That figure represents 21% of total global petroleum consumption. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, and Iran itself, every major Gulf producer depends on this corridor to reach international markets. There is no alternative route that is economically viable at scale. The east-west pipeline across Saudi Arabia can handle approximately 5 million barrels per day, less than 1/4 of Hormuz traffic. Every other bypass option requires infrastructure that does not exist or transit times that make them commercially unworkable. This is not a vulnerability that can be engineered away. It is a permanent geographic fact. Now, here is what the EIA's own modeling tells us about disruption scenarios. According to the agency's Energy Security Risk Assessment published in October 2024, a 14-day partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz, not a full blockade, merely a reduction in transit capacity sufficient to slow tanker movement by 40%, would reduce global oil supply by approximately 8.4 million barrels per day during the disruption period. Oxford Economics, in a separately commissioned scenario analysis from January 2025, modeled the price impact of such a disruption at between $120 and $140 per barrel of Brent crude within 10 trading days of the disruption beginning. At $140 per barrel, the average American household's annual fuel expenditure increases by approximately $2,300, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Modeling Framework. But Iran does not need to close the strait to weaponize it. This is the insight that most coverage of this strike is missing entirely. Iran has spent the past 3 years demonstrating with remarkable methodical precision exactly how much disruption it can create without triggering a threshold military response from the United States. Consider the documented record. In July 2023, the IRGC Navy seized the oil tanker Niovi in the Gulf of Oman, holding the vessel and its crew for 13 days before releasing it without concession. In April 2024, Iranian naval forces boarded and seized the container ship MSC Ares in international waters near the Strait of Hormuz in direct response to an Israeli-linked asset seizure. The vessel was held for weeks. In both cases, the United States condemned the actions through official State Department statements. In neither case did American forces physically intervene to recover the vessels. Iran observed both of those outcomes with institutional precision. According to a January 2025 report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Iranian military planners have systematically documented each instance of Western non-intervention in maritime incidents since 2019, using those data points to calibrate what CSIS analysts describe as Iran's operational confidence threshold, the level of action Iran believes it can take without crossing into full military confrontation. The last time a major power successfully used maritime chokepoint pressure to extract strategic concessions without triggering open war was 1973, when Arab OPEC members combined an oil embargo with implicit Suez Canal closure threats to fundamentally reshape American Middle East policy within 6 months. Iran is not unaware of that precedent. And here is the variable that the maritime security community is currently discussing with considerable urgency. When the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group departed the region in May 2024, Naval News documented a 47-day gap before replacement assets reached equivalent operational readiness in the Fifth Fleet's area of responsibility. 47 days during which American power projection in the Gulf operated below its standard deterrence threshold. The MTC Gulf Voyager was struck during a period when that deterrence architecture was still in the process of reconstituting itself. Whether that timing reflects Iranian intelligence capabilities, fortunate coincidence, or something more deliberate is a question that analysts at the Defense Intelligence Agency are, according to open source reporting, actively examining. What the data establishes without ambiguity is this: Iran has identified the precise bandwidth of action available within the gap between economic disruption and military retaliation. And they are operating within that bandwidth with increasing confidence, which brings us to the dimension of this crisis that almost no mainstream outlet has addressed. Because the entity that stands to benefit most from sustained elevated oil prices and continued American strategic distraction in the Gulf is not in Tehran, it is in Beijing. Here's a number that should reframe everything you think you understand about this strike. In the 6 hours following the first confirmed reports of the MTC Gulf Voyager attack, West Texas Intermediate crude oil futures increased by 8.3% on the CME Group exchange. That is not a gradual market adjustment. That is a price shock, the kind that trading algorithms are specifically designed to amplify, because momentum in energy futures attracts capital faster than almost any other asset class. By the end of that first trading session, the global oil market had added approximately $160 billion in aggregate market capitalization in 6 hours. Iran's entire annual GDP, according to World Bank data for 2023, is approximately $367 billion. Let that proportion settle for a moment. Now look at what happened at the retail level, because this is where the geopolitical becomes personal for every American watching this. According to the Energy Information Administration's weekly retail fuel price report covering the second week of June, the average retail price of diesel fuel in the United States reached $4.12 per gallon, the highest recorded weekly average since October 2022. That single data point carries consequences that extend far beyond gas stations. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas published a supply chain transmission model in 2023 establishing that every 10% increase in diesel prices translates to a 0.4 percentage point increase in the consumer price index for food and beverages within 60 to 90 days. The mechanism is direct and unavoidable. Every food item on a supermarket shelf arrived on a diesel-powered truck. Every component in a manufactured product moved on diesel freight at some point in its supply chain. Every farmer who planted the crops that became that food used diesel-powered machinery to do it. The strike on one tanker in the Persian Gulf will be felt at American grocery checkouts before the end of summer. But here is the dimension of the economic weapon that reveals the true strategic architecture of what Iran has constructed. According to vessel tracking and cargo data compiled by K-Peeler, an energy market intelligence firm, Iran exported approximately 1.5 million barrels of crude oil per day during May 2025. The majority destined for Chinese refineries in transactions conducted at an estimated 10 to 15% discount to prevailing market prices. When Iran's actions caused global oil prices to increase by 8%, Iran's discounted export price increases by approximately the same percentage in absolute dollar terms. The discount remains, but the baseline rises. Iran is simultaneously the agent of price disruption and a direct financial beneficiary of the disruption it creates. According to the Lloyd's Market Association Joint War Committee, war risk insurance premiums for vessels transiting the Persian Gulf increased from 0.1% to 0.5% of vessel value per voyage within 48 hours of the strike. For a supertanker valued at $100 million, that represents an additional $400,000 in insurance cost per single transit. Those costs are passed directly to oil buyers, which means they are passed directly to consumers. The last time war risk premiums reached this level was in the immediate aftermath of the September 2019 Abqaiq facility attack in Saudi Arabia, an attack that temporarily removed 5.7 million barrels per day from global supply and required 4 months of sustained diplomatic effort before insurance markets returned to baseline pricing. Iran has built an economic weapon that fires in both directions, damaging its adversaries while simultaneously funding its own capacity to continue the campaign. The question that no official in Washington wants to answer publicly is a simple one. If the financial architecture of this conflict rewards escalation and penalizes restraint, what rational mechanism exists to stop it? That answer, it turns out, requires understanding who is watching all of this most carefully, and from the greatest strategic distance. There is a government that has not issued a single statement condemning the strike on the MTC Gulf Voyager. That government is in Beijing. China's foreign ministry spokesperson, when asked directly at the June 14th press briefing, described the situation as complex and called for all parties to exercise restraint. That is the full extent of Beijing's public response. No condemnation, no expression of concern for maritime security, no acknowledgement that 21% of global oil supplies, including China's own imports, transits the waterway that Iran just demonstrated it can disrupt at will. That silence is a policy position. According to the International Energy Agency's April 2025 oil market report, China imported approximately 11 million barrels of crude oil per day during the first quarter of 2025, making it the single largest oil importing nation on Earth. Approximately 1.5 million of those barrels per day originated in Iran, purchased at the 10 to 15% market discount documented by Kepler. When global oil prices rise 8%, China's discounted Iranian supply becomes proportionally more valuable in relative terms. Beijing's strategic petroleum reserve, estimated by the IEA at approximately 1 billion barrels, provides a cushion that absorbs short-term price shocks that would destabilize less prepared economies. China absorbs the disruption. Its competitors absorb the damage. The United States-China Economic and Security Review Commission's November 2024 annual report documented the transfer of dual-use component technology to Iranian defense manufacturing entities through intermediary companies registered in the UAE and Hong Kong, a finding that has received almost no mainstream coverage. The last time a major power provided this caliber of indirect material support to a Persian Gulf actor engaging in maritime pressure campaigns against American interests was the 1970s, when Soviet naval advisors assisted in the operational planning of Arab states' maritime strategies during the Yom Kippur War period. The question historians will eventually ask is whether Washington recognized the structural parallel in time to matter. Let me bring every thread of this analysis together, because the picture they form, when assembled in sequence, is more consequential than any single element suggests on its own. What began at 3:47 on the morning of June 14th as the disappearance of one transponder signal in the northern Persian Gulf is, on closer examination, the visible surface of three simultaneous and interconnected crises. In the short term, a direct disruption to global energy supply chains, measurable in diesel prices at American fuel stations within weeks. According to the EIA Baltic Dirty Tanker Index and Lloyd's Market Association data examined in this analysis, the financial transmission mechanisms are already in motion. In the medium term, a systematic expansion of what Rand Corporation analysts call Iran's operational confidence threshold. Every incident that does not produce a response sufficient to alter Iranian strategic calculus becomes institutional permission for the next incident. In the long term, an erosion of the maritime security architecture that has governed global energy trade since the conclusion of the tanker war in 1988. The question historians will ask about this moment is not whether the strike on the MTC Gulf Voyager was an act of war. The question is whether the 72 hours that preceded it represented the last clear opportunity to interrupt a sequence that, once established as precedent, becomes structurally very difficult to reverse. I will be monitoring official responses from CENTCOM and the Fifth Fleet as they develop. If significant movement occurs in the next 48 hours, you will hear about it here before it reaches the standard news cycle. That is why this channel exists, and that is why subscribing right now is not a small decision.